I guess the first kind of question, because I'm going to talk to you about 14 and FanFest because it's right around the corner. But I do still want to get your thoughts on the latest Xbox, Activision, Blizzard news. Get your thoughts on Diablo 4. There's so much. Again, like this is great. So we'll be doing these shows roughly once a week, Thursday, and then while you're out at FanFest, I'll be covering it kind of from the remote location, and then we're gonna dial in like we are right now and have conversations about what it's like going on at FanFest and talk about all the announcements and the reactions, etc. So on that note, like from your expectation, setting your expectation for next week from not the live letter, but focusing in on purely what we're talking about with the keynote, which is 7.0 focused. And for those of you, just to set expectations, if you're new and this is going to be your first expansion, they'll come out in 7.0, and then the rest of it's going to be like, and now we're done talking about 7.0, and we're going to focus in on 6.5 with maybe a couple hints, but there's going to be any Q&A is going to be all asking about 7.0, and they're going to be like, well, we can't tell you about 7.0.
Before the Q&A, there will be some level of disclaimer. The last in-person FanFest, for example, they announced Blue Mage, and they said tomorrow we have an entire panel going over Blue Mage. So during the Q&A, please don't ask questions about the Blue Mage because we would prefer those questions be asked after the panel. And then they opened up the floor for questions, and I believe the first or second question was, so on Blue Mage, I had a question. So there will be questions that do not listen to whatever the instructions are because people are just excited. Mm-hmm. We're just excited. We've already forgotten about the rules before they even state them, and people will and there will be questions. 6.5 is a monstrous patch. So for anybody that maybe Shadowbringers was their first expansion, so they were kind of living through them in real time, not quite sure. And so Endwalker is their first time through on patch days each time. I've already seen some questions at 6.4 and at 6.45 kind of asking about, as we talked about those, they're like, hey, did they forget about the last Alliance raid? Some questions like that. So for anybody that's not familiar with the patch cycle, it is fairly regular, so that's why people don't answer your question readily because they just assume you know. Because once you're around, you'll know, and you'll get there. Welcome in, and basically the Alliance raids are your odd-numbered patches, 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, and so the last Alliance raid will be on 0.5. The raid series are on even-numbered patches, 0.0, 0.2, 0.4, and those are our Savage fights. We get somewhere between 1 and 2 ultimates per expansion, and they aren't going to put those at the end of the expansion because while they're meant to live on and be interesting long term, and they try to protect those as best as possible, they're most interesting if you could put those with like the 0.1 and 0.3 patch. Mm-hmm. So I'd assume they're going to do that moving forward. Now remember, we are supposed to get yet another Criterion. Island Sanctuary had maybe said we were going to be expanding our islands. Mm-hmm. And there's still some kind of missing pieces of content in with this. And so the 0.5 patch is the largest patch cycle outside of the expansion drop because it is the only patch where the half patch gets main story. Its half patch has historically, I don't have my spreadsheet with me today on our site, but its half patch historically runs a little shorter. Our half patches are normally about 56 days after patch. Mm-hmm. The 0.55 patches can easily come in at like 32, 46 days. So they can come in several weeks early. And the reason for that is that's what's going to unlock the final tier of Savage. So all that loot drop puts the echo on it, all of that. And that's also going to be when your final relic drops, which is the most powerful weapon all expansion. So for anybody that's been too nervous about Savage, the best time to hop on Savage is during the launch. The next best time is the 0.55 when we are all way too powerful. And there will be all sorts of communities like the amazing Llama Todd that are happy to help you through that. So if you've always been interested in it, you're coming up on the perfect window to give Savage a go.
So beyond that, though, for the keynote itself, like what are you like? If you had to pick 3 things that are going to just rock your world, like things that you are just like, even if you know they're coming, I just generally curious, like what are your 3 most like? I'm looking forward to this because to give an example for anybody who's listening to kind of focus the question a little bit, we know Zeppela was really excited about Mail VR. Like that was an obvious thing that was something stated. So has there been kind of this thing that you like, man, I would like, even if it doesn't happen, I'm still going to be fine with the game. But are there a couple bullet points that you'd be like, yeah, that's my bingo card?
I mean, first of all, remember that they have to save some surprises for the next 2 FanFests, as opposed to something like BlizzCon, where they can reveal an expansion to World of Warcraft and it's the one and done. And so they can kind of release their full load of information, as it were, and they don't have to worry about resting up for future releases. These guys got to be able to go 3 times back to back. And so Yoshibi's going to save some things, and what they'll do is they'll tease us. Big teases that will be revealed across these keynotes in general. I do believe we're going to get female Rothgar. And so at some point see a female Rothgar. I don't know if that'll be the NA. At some point we will probably get at least 1 new job. I do think they should drop to 1 new job per expansion, just because the total number of jobs, and then a heavy rework on jobs. I would also expect us to see what the reveal is for the title job. I think that will be at the NA. So Endwalker was Paladin, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to give us a great indication of where we're going. I agree with Eorzean Archives that the coolest one for me to be excited about would be if Summoner was the title job, because for any of you that don't know the lore, like me, anytime before 2 years ago, the Southern Sea Isles on the northern end of Mercidia is where summoners and arcanists and stuff came from, the land of the Lalafell. And so if we could find out that it was Summoner, that would kind of confirm that the next place we're going is south.
Yeah.
I would love to go see that. When you see your map of Eorzea, in the foggy area in the middle, in Ilsabard, there are places that I'd love to go, like Korvos, which is just north of Thavnir. But if you go south of Thavnir, down to past the bottom edge of that map, there is a whole other continent down there called Mercidia, and that would allow us to have a very maybe dragon themed, maybe some really interesting Miqo'te lore. Like there's a lot of fascinating people that have gotten, and things that have happened down there. There's some big conflict as far as like maybe studying some of the old ancient civilizations of the game, and kind of the ownership of the land, and so like we could learn a lot of really interesting stuff, and that would allow us to see a land where maybe Ascians and stuff have impacted 14 in ways that we haven't seen, because we don't directly interface with Mercidia. It's referenced a lot. We've never been, and that's where I'd want to go. Korvos is interesting. The New World is interesting. Other shards are interesting, but like Mercidia is where I want to go for an expansion. And I want every zone there. What I don't want,
that's what was going to be my follow-up.
1 zone of Korvos, 1 zone of Mercidia, 1 zone of New World, and then they've taken what could have been 3 separate expansions and they just rush through it, and then you only get to see a glimpse of any one of those places. My one disappointment about Garlemald being a zone in Endwalker is that because it's a zone and it's not a Garlean expansion, it's hard to see how we'll get to see all that the Garlean Empire was, as opposed to if we'd been split an entire expansion exploring the impact of just Garlean instead of all the things that Endwalker addresses. We could have really dove a lot wider on just how the Garlean Empire rose and all of that, and all those events of them being pushed out of their original land and then having to take that back through the invention of Magitech, and seeing how that resulted in all these different cultures they assimilated. So they kind of act like maybe like the modern day Russian Empire, where like think of here in the US, we talk about Russia like it's a country, but it's actually more of an empire with like multiple different time zones, multiple different languages, multiple like whole different sections of Russia are run very, 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 very differently. Substantially larger differences than like Louisiana versus California. Like it's way broader. Russia's a very diverse place. And like the Garlean Empire kind of has some of that. And like we don't, in the modern day, in the real world, we don't really have, like Russia's the best example I can think of somewhere that has that many different, and maybe if you try to compare like the whole EU, right, where you have people who speak different languages, think of different governmental bodies, grew up with different educations and different cuisines and different, you know, like maybe it's just hard to picture exactly how the Garlean Empire works, because it's they kind of just absorbed other disenfranchised people, not always willingly. And I would have loved to explore that a lot more than what we got to. And so I hope we do that with Mercidia.
Yeah, that's gonna be really interesting to see. Obviously, the location will be, you know, revealed, and like you said, that I would love if, you know, if it was all zone based on that continent, so you can, you know, spend so much time. One of the things is, like what you said, really took me back to when Zepital was just a dungeon, as opposed to like a full zone. And it's like, oh man, I'd love to be able to explore more of what this is, but okay, it's a dungeon, you know, like that's what it is. If they ever expanded on that, I think that'd be a real win. Would you want to see them See, for me, I don't know why. I would love to see them like restore the three main cities into like one zone. With the technology that they have in place, it's a small thing, but it goes actually a long way. Especially when you look at all the newer cities, they're all just one. They're unified. They're not disconnected. Would you like to see some kind of technology, enhancement to the base 2.0 forward game with 7.0, along with the visual graphic representation that's we're expecting?
I don't totally understand how they built them. I'm not your tech guy, but what I will say is like, what is more likely based on the way other games have done it is that some event causes Ul'dah, Limsa, and Gridania to be rebuilt. And so instead of having old and new Gridania, you have newest Gridania, probably a better name out there. And that becomes a whole new Gridania, and they reshape it in its entirety. And so they just remove any inefficiencies in it. Not just make it one zone, but also just make it easier to traverse in general. Maybe make the seasonal event able to accommodate more diverse seasons. Maybe structure the little tiny aetherites into ways that make more sense so that when you're navigating, you're not like, why am I going to the Lancers Guild because I want to train one of my Disciple of Hand? And so like, I think there's some other things that could be kind of cleaned up. The problem with that is I think something would be lost out of what's there. So what I would hope for is that we would do some of the phasing technology, and we would leave that in place archivally. Not necessarily because the newer one's not better. Newer is always better. But I think that it would be really nice. Like, it's a bummer for people that they cannot go back. I know Yoshi P thinks that 2.0 is so much better than 1.0, but that's very easily stated for somebody that got to experience it, right? And so like, it would be nice if we saved that for people. I don't like when they remove quests rather than maybe archive those. We're going to pull those out of MSQ and we're going to make them optional side quests. Like, I would prefer us leave things in game, just in general. I just think we're at a point where hard drive space is cheap. We're at a point where, computers are capable of handling quite a bit. I would rather just leave everything in game instead of trying to have somebody police, is this good enough to stay in game or not? Let's just keep it all. Let's just be digital path rats, and let's just archive everything.
Yeah.
I like that in World of Warcraft, the old Silithus is still in game. I think that's really great. So I don't disagree with you that some of these things like city states that early, especially as we talk about like continually rehashing the new player experience, I think that city states are absolutely something that could be cleaned up. But I would prefer that to be done in a way where you can still go back and do the old ones.